friends. Welcome to the Reasonable Truth Podcast. This is your host, Prashanth Daniel. Welcome to the show. It's been a while since we've actually done a recording. It's been crazy times for me here at home, and family and I have had a pretty busy summer, and work has been kind of crazy as well. So it is really good to be behind the microphone again. And I want to introduce our guest today. His name is Brett Kunkle, and he's the founder and president of MAVEN, a movement to equip the next generation to know truth, pursue goodness, and create beauty. Brett has developed a groundbreaking approach to mission trips, creating a one-of-a-kind experience that immerses participants into real-life engagement in apologetics, theology, worldview, and evangelism. Brett is also a teaching fellow at the Impact 360 Institute, and he was an associate editor for the Apologetics Study Bible for students and co-authored a practical guide to culture, helping the next generation navigate today's world. He's also received his master's degree in philosophy of religion and ethics from Talbot School of Theology, and he and his wife, Erin, kids live in Southern California. Brett, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Prashanth. That is a long bio. I think I'm going to have to cut that thing down, man.
You know, I thought about skipping a few paragraphs, and I was like, you know what? That's not up to me. I should leave that up to you to do. So,
looking forward to discussing some important things.
Yeah, likewise. Glad to have you on the show. You know, I should probably give our listeners a little bit of history. I think the first time I heard of you was like years back. It's probably right about the time I was just before I graduated from Biola. So that was like 2013-ish. In fact, Alan and I graduated in the same batch. And so that's when I heard about you, and I knew Erin had spoken at Talbot Wives a few times. And that's where my wife even kind of became familiar with some of the things you guys were doing. And I know you and I have kind of met a few times and talked on and off over the last decade or so. So
years ago I was with a great apologetics ministry called Stand to Reason, and Alan Schleman was one of my colleagues there, and that's where I was at for 14 years before we started MAVEN in 2017.
And I've had a few of the SDR guys here. I've had Alan on and Greg, and so it's good to have you on here as well. So let's go ahead and get kind of started with your story. Tell me what kind of got you into Stand to Reason, and then tell me about sort of your transition to MAVEN, like what prompted that and all that.
Yeah, well, what got me into Stand to Reason starts back when I was a kid. I mean, I grew up in the church. My mom and dad got saved when I was like 10 months old. So I was raised in the church and had, I think, a really good, healthy upbringing in the church, was part of some very good churches. When I was a little junior high student, got involved with a church in Southern California where I had a youth pastor who became a huge mentor in my life, mentored me right into ministry. My junior year in high school, I decided I wanted to go into full-time youth ministry. And so was in the church for the first 18 years of my life. But my freshman year in college, I ended up going to a junior college in Southern California, taking Philosophy 101. And that's where I met Professor David Lane, PhD, right, the smart guy. And basically what Professor Lane did was he dismantled my Christianity for that semester and challenged me regularly. And he wasn't the stereotypical, angry kind of atheist or skeptic. He was very winsome, very charismatic, a very popular teacher. Everyone loved him. I loved him. I was a surfer. I am a surfer. He was the faculty advisor for the surf club at our junior college. So anyway, I thought he was a cool guy. But intellectually, I was not ready, and he dismantled my faith. So that sent me into a very serious episode of doubt and just struggling with these questions and thinking, okay, if this is not true, if the Christian faith is not true, if the Bible is filled with all of these errors that he allegedly, pointed out to me, then I can't continue on in this. And so then through that process, I ended up discovering apologetics. And apologetics played a very formative role in rebuilding my faith and actually rebuilding it in a way that it was much stronger. And so was working with young people, and I just thought to myself, hey, I grew up in the church. These students are growing up in the church. They're going to go off to college. They're going to be ill-equipped like I was. And then some of them are going to walk away if they're not ready for these kind of challenges. So I thought, I have got to prepare these students. So I started teaching apologetics to my youth. I started doing some kind of creative things in youth ministry to really equip my kids to know what they believe and why they believe it. And so then after doing that in youth ministry for about 11 years, I ended up joining up with Stand to Reason, and I became the student impact director there, started speaking to student audiences and student conferences. I ended up developing what used to be called the Rethink Student Apologetics Conference there. It's now the Reality Conference. Just knowing that there was a huge need within youth ministry and within the church for a student-focused apologetics conference. And then we started expanding that around the country. And that continues to live on. And then I also was doing worldview mission trips for students while I was there. And so served at Stand to Reason for 14 years, 14 really good years, but really thought we need to focus more on the family, on parents and students. And so ended up deciding to start a new organization called MAVEN. Now, a lot of the biggest question we get is, well, what does the word MAVEN mean? A MAVEN is someone who is knowledgeable in a certain field and then seeks to pass that on to others. And that's what we want to do at MAVEN, is we want to take the knowledge of the Christian worldview and pass it on to the next generation. And we do that primarily by working with young people, and then secondarily by working with the people who work with young people. So we try to equip parents and youth pastors and grandparents and educators and Christian leaders to help disciple the next generation, but disciple them and disciple their minds. There's a discipleship of the mind that is greatly missing from our churches. And it's one of the reasons why our kids are ill-equipped for the culture that they're growing up in. So we started MAVEN in 2017. And if anyone's interested in finding out more about what we're doing at MAVEN, they can go to maventruth.com.
The very first time I heard that you had moved to MAVEN, I was like, what's MAVEN? I need to look this up. And I started pulling up all these professional wrestling links and things like that. Apparently there was a wrestler called MAVEN, I guess. And there's even a MAVEN, like a podcast that he has. And I was like, Brett's gone into wrestling? Like, I don't know what's happening. But I don't know if you've heard about this or not. But yeah.
Yes, I wrestle with ideas.
Yeah, there we go. You are a wrestler after all. Okay.
Yeah.
So good. So yeah, so that was a very interesting transition. And so you've obviously feel like this is the area God's called you to. And how do you see the impact of MAVEN over the last, what you said, to 2017 is when you started?
Yeah.
So the last 8 years.
Yeah, in September we will celebrate 8 years, and I mean we get glimpses of the impact all the time, and it's very encouraging. Number one, we hear from a lot of parents, because many of the resources for Christian parents do not add good, clear thinking, and they don't give the theological foundations and the biblical foundations for what we do and why we do it. And so the Christian worldview is often absent from parenting advice. And so we don't equip parents to think biblically about single area. So for instance, the area of discipline is absolutely foundational to parenting. And because Christian parents aren't equipped with a Christian worldview of discipline, they simply absorb the popular ideas out there in the culture. So there's a whole movement in parenting called gentle parenting. And when you start to examine it, its fundamental assumptions run directly contrary to the Christian worldview and to biblical truth. And so those assumptions simply get absorbed by Christian parents, and then the methods and the practical steps and everything you're supposed to do with your kid are informed by that, and you end up getting a non-biblical picture of discipline. And so then we don't know how to effectively equip or discipline our kids. But that's so foundational to their view of God and who God is, and ultimately their submission and obedience to Him. And so parents are desperately in need of thoughtful parenting resources that don't just say, "Hey, here are the 2 steps. Go do this." We need to think carefully about the nature of everything. We need to bring good, careful thinking to the table. We need to bring biblical thinking to the table, and then let that direct what we do. And so parents have just been hugely responsive, particularly to our parent podcast that we do, where we kind of just coach and mentor parents to raise up their kids, ultimately for the purpose of sending them back out into the culture, to engage the culture, to proclaim the truth of Christ, resist the false ideas of the culture, and all of those things. And so, and then when it comes to students, one of the primary things we do is we do these, what we call immersive experiences. And they are worldview mission trips. We have 3 in particular. One is focused on scripture and theology, helping young people to know what they believe. And so we call that our biblical immersive experience. And what we do on that trip is we do training beforehand, and then we will work with individual groups. So we'll work with a youth group, we'll work with a Christian school or a college group, and we will customize a trip to Salt Lake City, Utah. And of course, if you're familiar with Salt Lake City in the state of Utah, it's a majority population is Mormon, and many of them are Mormons. Even if they're what we call Jack Mormons, they're not currently practicing. They still hold the ideas of Mormonism. And so what we do is, after we give them some training in theology, they get training in a biblical view of the nature of God, that God is Trinitarian. And they get a biblical view of the gospel, that it's by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone. And then we put them in situations where they have to have conversations with real live Mormons. And then we have an apologetics trip. And that's where we focus on knowing why you believe what you believe. And that's where we give them apologetic training beforehand. We take them to a college town. We have several locations for this. And we will bring out atheists to engage them. We'll go on to a secular campus and talk to non-Christian college students. We'll go to the Unitarian church. We'll engage with unbelievers to help young people know why they believe what they believe.
Right. No, that's great. And I want to do a whole segment on what you're doing specifically for young people and for children. And I've kind of saved that to the end. So we'll get to that later. But before
are you indicating that I jumped ahead there?
No, it's completely okay. No problem. It kind of whets the appetite for the last segment, right? It's like a teaser trailer, if you will. Let's talk about, so I have 3 segments. I want to talk about Christianity, culture, and then children. And so, you have been in the apologetics world now for quite a long time. And you've seen I've kind of amateurly done apologetics maybe over the last 17 years and sort of professionally done it over the last 4. But even within my short time in this field, Brett, the landscape has changed. When I first got into apologetics, the questions were all sort of the classical questions. Why does God allow evil? Did Jesus rise from the dead? All those kind of things. But just in the last 5-6 years, even, the questions are all crazy, just ridiculous. It's stuff that we would have taken for granted for all humanity to have understood and believed for thousands and thousands of years are now up for discussion on the table all over again. Yeah. And so it is incredible to me how much the landscape has changed. So I'd like to kind of pick your mind on where do you think Christianity is in terms of its relevance, in terms of its influence right now? Because on the one end, we've seen sort of a downward trajectory, at least in Western culture, for sort of the decline of the Christian faith, and it's kind of been trending downward for quite a while now. But then again, here and there, I'm seeing little spurts, little vibe shifts, if you will. And especially that's kind of evident even from, some high profile people like Russell Brand and, even sort of Jordan Peterson sort of dabbling with faith and things like that, I think it's definitely brought some attention back to the Christian faith and Gen Z's sort of struggle with, trying to find meaning and purpose and things like that in life. And there seems to be lots of studies that indicate that they are really drawn towards sort of the authenticity of a worldview, excuse me, and a belief system. And so it seems to me like there are pockets where Christianity is really becoming more relevant and more influential. And then otherwise, sort of big picture, it doesn't look like that's the case. Even with Richard Dawkins recently, several months ago, making this statement about, he wants to live in a Christian culture. So speak to that, if you will, to sort of the influence and the relevance of Christianity today in the world scene.
Yeah, well, in summary, it's all a big mess out there in a lot of ways, because you have, and this is how, I think I often think about things. You just have multiple streams running in. I don't think there's one thing that we can point to that says, hey, Christianity is making a comeback, or Christianity is dominant, or Christianity is on the wane. You have various pockets. Now, there are certain, kind of vibe shifts that we've seen, particularly, I think, since kind of COVID. You had this situation where, a lot of people didn't know what was going on. There's a lot of uncertainty, and there was a lot of trust placed in kind of authorities, institutions,
experts.
Right? Experts. And so particularly in medical professionals, healthcare experts, scientists, politicians at that time. And then you had that. You had then shortly thereafter all the stuff with race, starting with kind of the George Floyd incident, the various marches, the rioting,
riots, and
all of that. You had then this kind of throughout, COVID, whatever dates we put on that, there was a growing distrust of what was coming out. There was, kind of tight lockdowns and things like that. And then, some obviously political change from a Trump presidency to a Biden presidency. So you had these things, and then back to a Trump presidency,
right,
which seems to indicate some of that vibe shift, where there has been a growing distrust of institutions and authorities, where people are looking outside of mainstream sources for information, right? So in one sense, it feels like to me there's, in certain segments of society, there's a real openness to particularly Christian ideas. Now, kind of, Christian ideals or Christian values, there may be a general openness to, or some of the ethic of Christianity. And now that doesn't necessarily mean a receptivity to the gospel proclamation. Right. That people are now all of a sudden wanting to embrace the full gospel. But this is where you have indicators like a Richard Dawkins, who says, I want a cultural Christianity. And in some senses too, I would agree. I think a cultural Christianity is better than a cultural secularism. Correct. Or a cultural atheism. So there's all these various kind of streams. There's different segments of society. There's with media and new media, you have all of these different channels of information. So things aren't as monolithic as they once were. And so people are getting feedback from all different kinds of areas. However, it does seem there has been some move, and primarily politically, back to some conservative ideas and values.
Right.
And partly, I think some of this too was connected to all the trans stuff,
right,
that has just gone so far.
Yeah.
And people saying we're just denying basic reality here. And these ideas that certain, segments of the culture starting to embrace have ideas or have consequences for the rest of us, for all of us. And so there seems to be some swinging back and realizing, okay, what are some of the foundations of our culture that has made our culture, American culture in particular, a healthy culture, or healthy in the relative sense, not perfect, but has built a strong society that's built a world power, that's been a force for good. And I think there's openness to some of the ideals of Christianity. Unfortunately, I think my assessment of the American evangelical church in general is that we're a very weak church. And so we're just not able, I think in really effective ways, to harness some of that vibe shift, to be able to articulate our ideas and our views about the world and why our ideas make the best sense of reality, and help us to navigate reality well, and then also then to justify those things.
Put your finger on it exactly. So when you say we're weak, are you saying that Christians are sort of they're unaware of the culture wars, or they should be paying more attention to the issues, or they should be willing to engage? Where exactly are you going with that?
Yeah, I think fundamentally, one of the fundamental problems is that we are a very anti-intellectual church. Christians in general have been just socialized by the Christian culture in the US to be very anti-intellectual. And part of the problem is that we don't even know that we're anti-intellectual. We have just been given an anti-intellectual, overly emotionally driven faith that does not match up with the scriptures. And so we we're pretty powerless to engage culturally with the ideas. We lack men and women who are articulate, who advance far in their fields and are some of the best thinkers in their fields, and then are able to influence the culture that way. I mean, when you think about some of the folks who maybe are adjacent to us or sympathetic to conservative causes or aligned with us, you think of someone like a
Matt Walsh,
Jordan Peterson, but a Matt Walsh, a Ben Shapiro, and these aren't evangelical Christians. Now, Kirk is an evangelical, and he's trying to do some things to help empower the church. But most of them, Peterson's not a Christian. Matt Walsh is a Roman Catholic. Ben Shapiro's a Jew. So where are the Christian evangelicals who are the intellectuals, who are then able to engage the culture? And then in the pulpit, our pastors, and I'm a pastor, so I co-pastor a church here in Southern California. So I love the church. I support pastors. I know how hard it is for pastors to be pastors, but we have just been socialized, I think, by our modern Christianity to be very anti-intellectual in our discipleship of people. And, part of that goes back to some of our fundamental views, our views about the head and the heart. We don't have a biblical understanding of the heart. And so we have kind of just absorbed the idea that the heart it's our emotions, it's our feelings, it's our affections. It's kind of the right-brained approach versus the left. And then we import that into scripture, in the biblical text. And so when we see the word heart being used, we think of it primarily in the biblical text being used in this way, that it really is kind of our emotions. And then we talk about, a relationship with God it's not something that you do with your head. It's what you do with your heart, right? The relationship has more to do with your heart and your, those kind of things than with knowledge. And we've completely lost a biblical view of the mind, and I think of the heart and of knowledge. And so this has fostered anti-intellectual Christianity. Our views of faith are mistaken. We think that faith is kind of believing things when everyone's against you, or when all the evidence is against you, or you believe in spite of logic. You believe in spite of the skeptics, and it's just kind of an act of the will to just believe no matter what. And there's no connection between faith and reason. And so I think that's a big culprit why we're powerless largely to engage the culture. Now, the great thing is we also know that God is sovereign, and he works despite our weaknesses. But I think if we're going to equip the church for the cultural moment, we've got to equip the church intellectually.
Yeah, no, I agree. And never before, Brett, have I seen such a clash of ideas as I'm seeing now, or the way it has been in the last few years. And I think even when I kind of see like trends on the internet and social media, I know you and I are on X, and we kind of see X is kind of its own cesspool, if you will. I try to really limit my time on there.
Good.
But yeah, you get there's definitely a disconnect, I think. And people, I think since the pandemic, there's been a great opportunity for the Christian worldview to shine, almost a sort of return to normalcy sort of feeling, in more specifically, maybe even in the US, but even across the West. Just the craziness of bad ideas, and the sort of bad ideas we've had to engage with over the last several years. And it seems that now, even with trends on the internet, like the trad trend, right? The trad wife, the trad life, the trad, all these sort of things are actually echoes of what Judeo-Christian ethics and values have been stating for a long time. And so it definitely seems, I think that's where we get the vibe shift, is people are like, wait a minute, this is insanity. And yeah, I'm not on board with the gospel. I'm not on board with all these things, but yeah, the Christians have been kind of talking about this stuff for a long time. And it seems to make sense that, life is a lot better when one man is just married to one woman. It seems like things are less, ugly when a man just uses his own bathroom versus the other bathroom, just things like this. And there's just been so much insanity in our culture that I've really felt like, man, what a great opportunity for the Christian worldview to shine through. And I look at all these guys, and I listen to some of these guys regularly, the guys we talked about, Charlie Kirk, Ben Shapiro, all these guys, and they're doing good work. I think, they're putting out some good content, good material out there. And I'm asking the same question. I'm looking around and like, hey, where's the Christian here? Here is all these non-Christian guys speaking incredible truths to the culture. We have all the tools and resources, but do we not have a platform? Is that what the problem is? Like, how hard is it to actually create a platform? But anyways, yeah, I'm just rambling, but what are your thoughts on that? What's the best way for thoughtful Christians to be able to, make a dent in the universe, if you will?
Well, this is one of the reasons why we are focusing on parents at MAVEN, because parents are the primary ones to disciple the next generation. And the church is a powerful ally and needs to be part of that. And then extended family, like grandparents and aunts and uncles, should be part of that as well. But parents have this primary role. And so what I think we need to do is start with the younger generation and equip them with a biblical worldview and raise them up in a very intellectual Christianity where the mind is valued, and we see the mind connected to the heart. And you see the biblical picture of heart, mind, soul, strength. It's the whole person that God wants in relationship with him. He doesn't just want an emotional response. He wants us to love him with his mind. And so I think one of the key things that we can do now, and I'm just thinking for a lot of us, maybe people who are not, who are in the pew, they're got a 9-to-5 job, but they're in the pew and they're thinking, well, sometimes we talk about culture. We talk about these big aspects of culture and institutions and politicians. And we think, well, I'm not that. So
Right.
I'm powerless to really do anything. Well, one of the best things that every Christian can do, no matter where you're at, is just to disciple your family. But to disciple them in a proper view of things. And so just, I have 5 kids. We 3 are out of the house. We've got 2 in the house now, 2 teenagers. And, one of the things that we have wanted to foster in our kids is a love of God with their mind. And we wanted to help them see the important role that the mind plays, and that it's your knowledge of God, it's your knowledge of theology that is the most important area of study first. And then everything else comes after that.
Right.
And this, I think, fits with the great commandment: love God, love your neighbor. First and foremost, we love God. And one of the ways we do that is by engaging our mind to know who he is. And one of the ways that we know who he is we study his world, and we learn about the nature of reality. And that tells us so much about God. This is what we call general revelation, natural theology. And then what that does, the proper study of God's, of God's nature moves you to study his world. And when you study his world, you gauge intellectually, you grow so much. And so I think that's one thing just that all of us can do if we're, with our families, is to start engaging intellectually with our kids, and raising up kids who value the mind and will engage it to then. And I think what this will also do is equip our kids then to navigate the world, and to see kind of the false ideas out there. I mean, if you think about scripture, think about Paul's epistles. There's so much he says in the epistles that has to do with engaging our minds. Colossians 2:8, do not be taken captive by the elementary principles of this world, by false philosophies, false ideas, but be taken captive by ideas according to Christ.
Right.
And so don't be taken captive by false ideas. How do you do that? Well, 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 3-5. We're in warfare. He says,
we demolish false arguments. Yeah.
Demolish arguments, and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God.
Right.
And we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. Romans 12:2. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. I mean, on and on and on. The New Testament talks more about knowledge than it does about faith, which J.P. Moreland has pointed out in his book, Kingdom Triangle. Right. In fact, J.P. Moreland has done a ton of good work on this. He wrote a very important book called Love Your God with All Your Mind, which he sketches a biblical picture of the mind. And so we've got to start doing this with the next generation. And I think it's strategic, number one, because the next generation is they're so moldable and shapeable. Oftentimes the older generations are kind of set in their ways. They've been socialized in an anti-intellectual Christianity for the last 30 or 40 years that it's hard to get them going intellectually. Right. But with our young people who are then starting to enter college, we want to get them to think about how they can engage the world of ideas for the cause of Christ. So I think that's one big thing. I think we need to retrain our pastors in seminary. One of the things that we're doing, we need to plant new churches where this is just built into the DNA of the church. Right. That's why we planted the church that we did in Southern California, because we wanted a church that was intellectually engaged, that was going to equip our believers, hearts, mind, will, the whole person, elevate the life of the mind, engage the ideas in the culture. And so I think the planting of churches and the training of pastors is another very important part of this. And so it seems to me it starts in the 2 primary institutions that God has placed or that God has created to train us up and teach us and disciple us. And that is the family and the church.
Let's talk about culture. Is it just me, or does it feel like the culture is going crazy? I say we look around and we see, cultural Marxism everywhere. We see all these ideas like transgressiveness. Just the other day, I think I saw a clip of Andrew Lloyd Webber's new rendition of Jesus Christ Superstar, and I saw, I think what's her name, Cynthia Erivo, I think is her name, and she plays Jesus. I don't know if you happen to see this clip or not. I saw that, and I was incredulous about the way Jesus was portrayed. Cynthia Erivo herself as I think she's non-binary, female, and she was supposedly playing Jesus, and just the way that the imagery of how that was portrayed was very, very disturbing. And everything seems to be transgressive now. Everything is about breaking down the rules, subversing boundaries, ethical boundaries, boundaries of values that have always existed for a long time. And it reminds me of G.K. Chesterton's analogy of the fence, right? The fence that you come across when you're walking down a road. And he talks about how the wise person would look at that fence and say, okay, well, if there's a fence here, it must be here for a reason. And it would behoove me to find out why it's here. While the non-wise person would just be like, well, I don't know what it's here for, so I'm just going to rip it off. And so this is what we're seeing. We're seeing fences being uprooted in our culture in every single area, and all these bad ideas. So I guess what I want to ask you is it too simplistic to say that, well, the bad ideas are flooding in is because the church has taken a step back into the shadows? I think there is some degree of truth there, but I also want to make sure that we're not too reductionistic when we say that. I know that even in the US, Madeleine Murray O'Hair, going back 60s and 70s, prayer came out of schools. And like you talked about, the socializing, it's a social contagion almost, a privatization of faith. The church has sort of retreated into the shadows. And now we're seeing the voice of the culture getting louder and louder with the bad ideas. So what is happening here? Is it as simple as to say that the church has retreated, or is it something else?
Yeah, well, I think studying culture and the changing ideas of a culture, why certain ideas and views come to dominate a culture. I mean, it's somewhat of a complicated story, I think. I think part of the story is the intellectual tradition of Western culture over the last 500 years. And you look at certain thinkers, certain philosophical thinkers whose ideas have led to other ideas who have led to other ideas. And so you look at someone like a René Descartes and some of his ideas, and how then you get into the British Enlightenment and some of the philosophers there, like prominent guys like David Hume, Immanuel Kant, and some of their views. And then getting into the 18th and 19th century, you get into some of the logical positivism that we saw earlier in the 1900s. And so you see this, I think, slow march of ideas over hundreds and hundreds of years that then come to dominate our culture. You look at the work of Carl Trueman, who's a professor of, at Grove City College, and he's talked about this as well. But he also links not just the thinkers, but what he calls the social imaginaries,
right?
And not just the intellectual thinkers or the philosophers, but the artists and the psychologists and the practitioners, and how they take ideas and spread them around.
Right.
And so there's kind of a complicated matrix of reasons why we're why we are where we are. And Truman's been really good, I think, in tracing some of this and kind of identifying where we're at, because I think this is, in his book, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self, Carl Trueman is asking the question. I mean, the fundamental question he wants to answer is, how did our culture get to this place where we think that the statement, I am a man trapped in a woman's body, is a coherent statement? Right. Like, okay, you go back 100 years, you go back 50 years, and you say something like that, people would not have taken you seriously. And now here we are in in 2025
in the halls of academia, right?
Yeah, and you have people advocating for this in our higher centers of learning. So So this is part of what Truman's trying to do, is figure out how do we get here, and so that's there's a lot of different ideas that have dominated us. But I think, for kind of us normal folks, we are at a place where expressive individualism dominates our thinking, and it seems to me that this is simply a playing out of relativism, the relativism that we see. Hume gives it some roots when he moves our moral and religious views into the sentiments, and that knowledge is only sensory knowledge, what we can perceive with our five senses. So some of the moves that he made back then are still affecting us today. And so then there's this relativism of truth. And so then truth becomes relative to a culture, which was more of, I think, the predominant view in the 1900s, where it was cultural relativism.
Right.
But there's really no, principle to stop us from taking that relativism to its logical conclusions, and that's to radical individual relativism. And that's what expressive individualism is. Expressive individualism says the authority for all matters of truth is the self. Yeah. And so if you want to know what's true for you, you turn inward, and you are the own authority. You are your own authority, right. And whatever you determine to be true for you. So you could be biologically male, but you've determined, or you identify, or you've come to know that you are truly a female. Well, you're the authority, right. And you know that and so then you express that as the individual, and then you require everyone else around you to affirm that.
Right. I think, therefore I am, right?
That's just a radical. Yeah. Well, it's a little different than I think, therefore I am. Whatever I think is therefore true for me. And so it's just this radical relativism, right? That I, as the individual, determine what is true for me. That's where we're at. And so that, I think, that is one of the primary ideas that dominates our culture and explains why. It perfectly explains the whole trans movement, right? This is the philosophy of the trans movement. You go inside and determine who you are. Your identity, right? And so that's one of the big ideas. I think another big idea is critical theory, right? Right. And that's another idea. And so again, here you have different streams playing together to create the havoc. Yeah. That you mentioned, at the beginning of this segment. This is why we see the havoc. So this helps us to understand all of the identity politics in the culture right now, and why we seem to see so much division and hatred in our culture, and a kind of a fracturing of our culture amongst all of the different competing groups. Right. And fundamentally, critical theory looks at the world and divides it up and lots of people have observed this, but you've got these categories of
the oppressor oppressed matrix and all that. Right.
Yeah. So then so now that frames the world for us. Right. That frames the culture for us. Which is
kind of an interesting adjacent view, because with the whole, cultural relativism, there was this idea for quite a while that, okay, it's your truth and my truth, and what's true for you or what's right for you may not be, and everybody kind of have their own version of morality. And now here comes critical theory with this whole new lens, and it's no longer about what kind of morality you have, as much as the morality is now juxtaposed against this matrix of power dynamics. And so it doesn't matter. Something could be intrinsically evil and intrinsically bad, but whether it's morally good or not, at least in the eyes of the interpreter, completely depends on which side of the power matrix you fall on, which is just crazy. Again, this is what happens when we're not anchored in a Judeo-Christian heritage anymore.
Yeah, and so and what you see contradictory ideas where like in, that person who's declaring a certain people group based upon their skin color, right? White people, they are the oppressor group, and therefore they are evil, or they have done all of these things that are harmful.
Right.
Well, that person's not just expressing a relative truth.
Right.
Right. They are expressing something that they take to be objectively true.
Mm-hmm.
So you see the contradictions in the thinking.
Right.
And and this is just part of the history of postmodern thought. You've got these competing narratives, and they can be contradictory narratives, but at the end of the day, if there is no objective truth, if there is no objective reality, for which, for where we try to hook up our ideas to that thing and let reality guide us, well, then things are reduced to power dynamics and who can kind of wrest control, cultural control and cultural power, and then kind of impose their will on others. And that's, this. So all of that, I think, describes this messy situation where you've got these ideas that are vying for attention and domination of our culture.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I hate to break it to you, Brett, but as a white man, you're at the bottom of the totem pole. I'm sorry to say, man.
I'm not. I'm not a white man.
Oh,
I am a, and see, this is someone like me. I'm a half white man.
Okay.
Like my dad is white. My mom is Asian. My mom is Vietnamese.
Okay. I didn't know that.
So where do I fall, in this? I guess, if you've got some scale of privilege points,
there we go.
You may be a little higher on the scale.
Yeah. I got the melanin points over here. So, hey, no, very good. As we kind of wrap up, as we kind of get toward the end of the segment, I want to kind of come back to what the work that you guys are doing with MAVEN. And you guys are doing fantastic work, by the way. I've recommended MAVEN to a lot of our family friends, and I encourage them to check out your podcast. And I just recently watched two of your episodes, and it had to do with disrespect. And I really liked it. It was really good. Were those recent? You guys just did that recently, sometime in the last?
Yeah, we just filmed those, I think, in the last month or so.
Okay, that's what I thought. And it's really good because, I have 3 boys. 14, actually, he's not 14 yet. He will turn 14 next week. 14, 11, and 6. Okay. And we are already starting to feel some of that with our almost 14-year-old, with some of the tones and, the responses and things like that. And we're talking through it, we're working through it, but
sure,
it comes up every now and then, And so I was naturally, I wanted to watch that episode, and I did watch it. And I liked the segment where you guys were playing these clips of Coach J, Coach M. I don't know what her name was exactly, but some of the clips that she was talking about. And what I liked about what you and Erin were doing is you were not going down this rabbit hole of, over therapeutic, clinicalized, emotionalized approaches of gentle parenting and things like that. You were keeping it black and white, keeping it straight and saying, hey, listen, we can talk about all these things, but the culture's got these ideas that any problem that our children exhibit is our fault, probably. And if we correct it in ourselves, then they'll be fine. And you guys were like, no, that's baloney. That's fundamentally false. That's not true. Our kids are pagan sinners, and we are the authorities in their lives, and we need to teach them. Do we make mistakes? Of course we do, but they need us, more than anything else. And I like that straightforward approach and the very simple, clear approach you guys take with that.
Well, I think the biblical truth sometimes is very just straightforward.
Yeah.
And this is why it's so vital for us to develop a Christian worldview, right? Our worldview is just our picture of reality, and it informs every part of that picture, including parenting. And what it does, though, is it frames the world for us, and it gives us an understanding of the nature of reality, and then that informs what we do. And so, look, if your kids are basically good, then go to certified life coach, Coach M, and when it comes to disrespect, she's going to tell you, oh, no, what you got to figure, what you have to do is you have to empathize, and you have to be curious, and you have to figure out what's going on in their heart, and what it really is is disrespect is fundamentally them communicating that there's some
disconnection,
unmet need.
Mm-hmm.
And well, who's not met that need? Oh yeah, you as a parent. And so it's therefore fundamentally your fault as the parent. And it turns out so many gentle parenters they feel so guilty because the whole message is that, hey, you're the problem. You haven't done this for your kids. And you hear these gentle parents or parenting influencers, they just talk bad about their own parents. Right. And throw their own parents under the bus. It's just tragic. It is. But and what we say is, look, we start with biblical truth. We start with theology. Number one, that kid is made in God's image, so they are a valuable image bearer, and so we do treat them with respect. Number two, they are a sinner and they are a rebel by their very nature. They're not basically good and just need their needs met. No, they are a rebel. And they need training in righteousness. And in fact, there is a God who exists, and he is the highest authority. And our first and foremost command is to love and obey him. And there are eternal rewards and consequences for those who reject his authority or accept his authority. And so this is what we're dealing with. Now, that biblical truth, that biblical worldview frames the world and helps us to make sense of parenting then and what you do with disrespect and what disrespect really is. It's not merely the unmet need. Sometimes that may be part of the case, but even in an unmet need, the disrespect is a sinful behavior, right? And is coming from often a little rebel. And what is the primary command to children from the New Testament? It's children, obey your parents. God has given a command to kids, and kids have an obligation, not just to us as parents, but to God himself, right, to obey and honor their parents. And that's not just so my kids will do what I want them to do. Yeah. It's ultimately so it shapes their hearts and their minds and their will to eventually submit their lives to the ultimate authority, and that's God himself. And so this is where biblical parenting is preparation for their relationship with God. Right. And so, so that's the kind of thing that we want to do. Think carefully about the nature of things. Think biblically about stuff and apply it to every area of parenting. Whether it's how do you answer the question of transgenderism, all the way to what do you do to discipline your kids? How do you deal with a picky eater? Right. And everything in between. Because we think, the fundamental unit of society is the family. And so moms and dads raising up the next generation are going to be a powerful tool for us to impact the culture. Right.
No, it's really good. And I do think there are a lot of parents out there who are, of course, they're, I think victims of the gentle parenting philosophy, but also exhausted, tired, and I've seen even sort of within my own extended family, parents it's almost easier for them to not fight, to not confront, just so you can maintain peace. But you can't let truth die for the sake of peace, and it's very important that you fight those battles when they're still small before they turn into these raging infernos later when the kid's much older. And so, What would you, as we kind of wrap up here, what are some, obviously, I was going to say, what are some good resources you would recommend? Obviously, you're going to, here's your time to pitch your ministry, Brett, but what other resources would you target parents towards?
Yeah, well, I would say there are three things that we do at MAVEN to serve families and to serve the local church. Number one, we have virtual resources. And so primary in that is the MAVEN Parent Podcast. And the MAVEN Parent Podcast is a weekly podcast where we will help coach and mentor you in this. We'll share our successes, we'll share our failures, but we're always looking at a biblical worldview and how it informs us. And what I think, if you spend time with us listening to the podcast, I think it'll really help families do and parents do and educators and pastors as well and grandparents is it will help start building that framework for you. And then it makes sense of everything inside, makes sense of reality. And so that biblical framework is so important. So as a parent podcast, we have online courses look, there are parents out there who understand, or even pastors or youth leaders understand that their kids need to be equipped intellectually, and that they, as the parent or the leader, are not equipped to equip the kids. That's okay. And there's so many resources out there. You don't have to be a biblical scholar. One of the best things you can do is learn alongside your kids. Right. And so we've developed online courses. We have 7 online courses on various issues, from an introduction to apologetics to the image of God and how that theology plays itself out, biblical worldview, all kinds of things. So that's the online stuff. We have online articles, so we can, kind of come to you in that way. We do live events. We speak around the country. My wife and I, will do all kinds of different events. And then we also have our own MAVEN conference. We do 3 MAVEN conferences right now, one in Southern California. We have 2 coming up, one on September the 6th in Dallas, Texas area. We have a 3rd one in Indianapolis in November, and someone can go to mavenconferences.com for all the information about that. But that live in-person event is just, there's no replacement for it. Right. And that's one thing that we learned from COVID, right? Like the digital stuff, the Zoom stuff, good stuff, but you can never replace the way that God has designed us, and that's to be face-to-face, in person. Right. We are embodied creatures. And then for students, we do the immersive experiences. Right. And all that info is available at maventruth.com.
Very good. Very good. Yeah, I know. And even at our church here, we try to offer lots of resources for parenting and things like that. So maybe we should have you guys over. Maybe Maven needs to make a trip to Tulsa, Oklahoma. And
we would love to. Yeah, we are happy to go wherever we're invited. So get us out there.
Well, Brett, thank you so much for your time, man. I really appreciate it. I know you're a busy guy, and I know you literally just finished a podcast before you hopped on ours over here. So I appreciate your time. Thank you so much. And any parting words for upcoming apologists or parents or Christians in general?
Oh, well, why don't you just make it more broad? I would say this really practically. The way I frame my own life and the way I try to frame life for my kids is I say that we have 2 commands. Biblically speaking, we have 2 commands and we have 2 commissions. Love God and love your neighbor. Those are the primary commands. So above all, those are the things to pursue. Love God, love your neighbor. And then the 2 commissions that we have in Scripture, number 1 is the Great Commission, proclaim the gospel, Matthew 28, right? But also another commission that we were given before the Great Commission is what's called the Cultural Commission. That's Genesis 1. And so that is be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, rule over it. And so having families, having children, owning a business, being a doctor or a lawyer or a store clerk, or these are all ways that we fulfill the cultural commission. And so this is where Christianity encapsulates all of reality. It's the people doing ministry aren't just the pastors and missionaries. It's the men and women who are living out the cultural commission, proclaiming the gospel, living out the Great Commission as well. And through that, they love God and they love their neighbor. And that is just I think my encouragement to everybody is let those biblical truths frame your world that gives your young people a vision for what they are to do. And then we have all kinds of room within there to do the things that we love, the things that God has gifted us, the things that he's given us passions for. And there's all kinds of room in the kingdom of God for all of our various passions, gifts, and talents and energies and interests. Yeah. Perfect.
Wonderful. Brett, thank you so much for taking the time for being on our show today. And for those of you listening online, definitely check out the ministry. We'll put the links in the description in the show notes. Check out Brett Kunkle's ministry, MAVEN. Wonderful, wonderful stuff they're doing over there. Brett, thank you for being on the show.
Thanks for this good discussion, Prashanth.
Good. Of course. All right. That's it for now, folks, until we see you again on our next episode of The Reasonable Truth.